Hey, junkies, this is ARealGirl, and this is the Empty Set Decade in Review.
A decade?
And also I have with me Mr. Scott Sigler. How are you?
I am great.
Yeah, we're going to
I'm older than 10 years old. I've been alive a decade now, at least.
At least a decade.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
We'll bring you in for maintenance soon.
I don't remember most of it.
Yeah. That's because you were writing, I think.
Yeah, pretty much.
We are going to talk a little bit at the top of this podcast about the decade, in this past decade, and then we're going to talk about 2019 a little bit, and then we're going to talk about 2020 a little bit at the end. Yeah, okay. So if you guys are tuning in and you want to hear specifically stuff like when can I get my hands on Mount Fitzroy, or what's happening, when is Sigler Fest, or where is my copy of The Gangster and all that stuff. We're going to talk about that. It's going to be at the end of this episode, near the end of this episode, because we got to get through the decade first.
Kick ass.
Yeah. So we have, we have lots of stuff to go over. There's been so much travel, but for this month, we've pretty much been sitting at our desks working.
Me sitting on my ass, working on the keyboard.
Yes, lots and lots of that. So
tilling the keyboard field with the tractor that is actually my hands. I know there's an analogy in here, there's a metaphor.
I mean, if only we knew a writer.
I've been digging in the keyboard mines, trying to extricate them gold nuggets.
Well, Lord. You have your mind on Fitzroy, that's for sure.
Yes,
lots of mining.
I do. Lots of mining.
So you are actually currently working on Fitzroy. You are impressively close to finished. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but how's it going today?
It went good today. Finished a chapter today. I'm over 91% done with the final draft.
Yeah.
But there are... It's a shifty son of a bitch. Is what that manuscript is.
Yeah.
It slides all over the place. So we'll see how it goes. But soon.
Okay, so let's travel back in time. Say roughly a decade. And I will tell you guys, these numbers are for roughly the last 10 years. Scott and I have been working together a little bit longer than that. So you guys who love the numbers, I may have some of this wrong. I think I'm probably counting Contagious tour stops, even though I think those were in the end of 2008, maybe a couple of those were things like that.
Fine.
You can email me if you got to, but know that I know that this is a little bit slidey scale.
And before we get the comments that say,
well, actually, it's not really a new decade yet because it's a zero. The new decade starts on, on one.
I just said the last 10 years to avoid all of that, but go ahead.
The decade in review to which we are referring is about the 10 years that A and I have been working together.
Yeah, and we've been working together 11 years now, so...
You just shot my whole argument right in the ass.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's begin. So go back with me. Shwarmy sound effect. There we go. So I'm going to speak generally over these last 10 years. I would like you to guess how many books you published.
Over the last 10 years?
It's a little sketchy because it isn't all the books you've published, but I don't think you know that answer either.
It's not just like print books, like books. Does that count short stories collections and whatnot?
I counted those separate just for that reason.
Okay, for books, I'm going to guess.
Let's say novels. That's the right way to do that.
12.
Exactly right.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sweet,
if you don't count Infected, because that for sure came out well before this 10 years.
Yep.
The rest of them, Contagious published on December 30th of 2008. So I did include that because you did a lot of your touring in the next year.
Okay.
But so it's 12 novels and 3 short story collections. Since we didn't do the work of publishing the anthologies, I'll be honest, I did not go track all those down, but there's many, many of those. Mm-hmm. Part of our policy at Empty Set for anthologies is we commit to writing in anthologies with people you want to work with. That's one parameter. 2, the rights have to reverse to us within 2 years or so that we can put them in a short story collection.
Yes.
And 3, they have to be a reasonable word count. They can't be too big, and therefore we should probably focus on our own product if it's going to be 40,000 words or more.
Yes.
Or it can't be a 2,500 word story or 1,000 or a drabble, which is a 100 word story, because those are not your skill set and take longer than they should.
Yes. That's why you've never heard me on the Drabble cast of guys.
Yeah, even though they're great guys. Yeah.
Because I couldn't possibly fit a story into that.
Yeah.
I'm not that succinct.
Yeah. So I will start back. You and I met at the Infected. This is a very high level, but somewhere in our podcast archives, there's a whole story of this. I'll find it and put the show a link in the show notes. We met in 2007 at a tour stop where you were signing Infected, and you had arrived a little bit late, and we met very briefly, and then we met later that year at Dragon Con, and started to work together because you were about to go out on the Contagious tour, and I at the time was a logistics and meeting planner and logistics manager.
Yep,
and
that's right.
You sent, for whatever reason, you showed me or sent me your itinerary and said, "Does this make sense to you?" And I was like, "Well, there's a few pretty big problems here, but other than that, it looks pretty good." And so we started work together on that. And then, however that went down, you asked me if I wanted to help you self-publish, I guess, The Rookie.
Yep.
And at the time, I was a certified project manager, a PMP certified project manager. I was a chemist, and I did a lot of logistics management. That's it.
Yeah.
I was not a publisher.
No, we found that out.
Yeah, you also, as it turns out, were not a publisher.
either.
So I bring that up only to say that we have learned quite a lot since putting out The Rookie in 2010.
Yes.
If you are lucky enough to own a hardcover copy of The Rookie, congratulations.
Yes.
If you are not, and you have been seeking that holy grail, I will be honest right now and tell you in the Decade in Review, it has 110 typos in it. And that is about 100 too many.
That's a lot. That's a lot of typos.
Yeah, that's one of the big things we did wrong.
I will put on my inspirational hat here. What are the when they put the quotes up in the wall, the frame, are those accessories?
Accessories, yes.
I'll put on my accessories, regional sales manager for accessories hat. We are a good example of, if you want to do something, just dive in and start breaking shit. And that's what we did, as you just pointed out with The Rookie. We did so many things completely wrong because we didn't know what we didn't know. But here we are 10 years later, profitable business, doing great.
Getting a lot smarter. And I will, that's actually a really good point, because one of the graces that we will talk about a lot in this hour of Year in Review is how graceful and good it is to be part of this community around your writing and around your books. And for me, it's a different situation. You are the widget factory, so to speak. You're the guy who makes all the things that we all fan girl and boy about. But for me, I do a lot of that work, but I'm also a fan of the writing, and it's been really, it's an insurmountable plus to have such a great community.
I like it.
And that you will hear over and over again during this Year in Review. So those are high level. We did 12 novels. We didn't do the entire Infected trilogy together because you were already working with Random House before we met. But the rest of
Julian Pavia, the editor at Random House, was great.
The rest of the Infected trilogy, and then the Generations trilogy, of course, the standalones Nocturnal and Ancestor, and obviously all of the GFL and the short story collections are the things that you put out.
Do you count the Crypt in there? Crypt Book 1?
I didn't, only because we normally talk about books that are published, and that was only a podcast.
Got it. Okay.
But that also...
Well, I just got a flush of excitement in my chest
because,
thinking about the Crypt.
Because it's coming. Yeah. Oops, time to feed the dogs.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
Let them starve. We got work to do.
So in the last decade, you have been on a handful of book tours. This is an interesting thing because as the market for books changes and people are doing more listening and more reading on Kindle, bookstores have changed in the last decade. And it is difficult to actually tour bookstores anymore. Even for big names, new guys, everybody. It's kind of tough. The first tours that we did together that I helped you manage logistically were 10 cities, 12 cities, things like that. When we did the Rookie tour, it was 24 cities.
Yeah, it was huge.
And now even the big tours are, 5 cities.
Yeah, you're right.
Books.
Even the really big,
thing.
like Victoria Schwab or Pierce Brown has a tour, and it's not that many cities because they're really hard to put together. So hard to find places to go do it, which when you go back to the Rookie, we were doing sports bars and stuff. And that was fun.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because back when we were doing the Rookie, I tried really hard to do bookstores, just your traditional, what you used to do, which was go to a bookstore, sell the books, go to a bar nearby. But they didn't want it because they wasn't part of their system and they couldn't put it in their system because that's the way the business worked back then. And we weren't a quote unquote publisher that could be found in their online standard ordering systems because we were bringing all the books ourselves.
And now we can, and most of those bookstores are gone.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's such a weird quirk of progress, I guess. So we did do a whole bunch of touring.
Okay.
I would like you to guess how many tour stops you went on in the last 10 years.
In the last 10 years?
I will give you a heads up and say Infected does not count.
Oh, okay. Infected does not count. Gosh, that was 24, 40?
Oh, no.
No?
112.
What? Holy shit, dude.
That's
really?
tour stops. That's not cities. Some of the cities were repeated over different tours.
Oh,
but
sure.
112 tour stops.
112 tour stops.
In 7 countries.
I need to make a tour t-shirt of that shit.
Yeah.
This very tiny print on the back.
Yeah. And then even that in itself changed a lot over the decade. Like I was mentioning, for your Infected tour, as an example, you did Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, New York City, and Houston, Texas.
Yes.
And then as I think maybe the heyday or the climax of the book touring model before ebooks and audiobooks started to grow was probably, I'm going to guess, around 2000, right around the time we started to work together, because then your Contagious tour was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15 cities.
Okay.
And then The Rookie, as I mentioned, was also that year, and we did 24 cities. And
how many was Ancestor?
Ancestor, which was the following year, turned out we did it in 2 sections because you went to Australia.
Oh, yeah. That was great.
1, 2, 3, 4, 27.
27.
But it was separated. Yeah, if you separate the Australia.
It's oddly, that's my favorite one, because side story, we go into Random House and you put together this amazing budget. There's not even a word to describe how tight the budget was for the Rookie tour, but you pulled that off. We did that all on our own, 24 cities in 27 days. It was ridiculous. And then we go in to pump up Ancestor. And this is after Contagious hit the Times bestseller list. So we were very excited. And we go to Random House and they gave us this 7-city tour for Ancestor.
Yeah.
Having been on a Random House tour for Infected and for Contagious, I'm like, you guys, I appreciate the treatment, but you guys, I would rather take that money and go stretch it out to as many cities as we can. 7 cities. What we're spending on each city, particularly for the hotel I staying and stuff, is an inefficient use of money for me to build a fan base. So they were great. Random House, basically we said
24 it is. Sorry, I missed
24 for Ancestor?
Yeah, 24 for Ancestor.
We said, can you guys just give us the money and we'll book the tour? Which no business in their right mind should do.
But they were
we
great.
did it.
Yeah,
we did it. And you turned 7-city tour into 24 cities, the same budget.
Yeah.
Now there were a lot
and 2 countries. We went to Australia with that money too, which we wouldn't have done.
There were a lot of...
Well, you went.
A lot of bagel sandwiches. Very
that was the Rookie tour. That was the Rookie tour. Yeah. So what he's talking about is the Rookie tour. So that was actually, those 24 cities for Ancestor in 2010 was actually a bigger budget than we had to do the 24 cities in 2009 for the Rookie, because Random House was willing to give us their book tour budget.
Right.
Which was more than we spent on the Rookie. But they were great because they were like, we can totally do this, but literally this is all we can do. Like, you can't come back
for more
and say gosh, we went over by $3,000 because we won't be able to fix that.
They were so dope. We're like, let us book it. They're like, all right, we'll give it a shot. And it worked out great.
Yeah. But yeah, on the Rookie tour, we did a lot of eating out of a cooler in the back seat as if we were 6 years old on vacation with our parents.
And quick shout out to the first tour stop ever before I started working with you, Borderlands Books in San Francisco, California. Yeah. Let me have a tour stop for my self-published book, Earthcore, way back when. So we love them to death. They're still in business. If you are in the San Francisco area or you are stopping in the San Francisco area, put that on your list of places to go. It's an awesome bookstore. Yeah.
And they also suffered in the change of how bookstores work after the change in the market, and did a great thing. They they said, we got to close. We can't figure it out. And so many people who love that store came to them and said, we can help. What can we do? They created a sponsorship model.
Yep.
And we are sponsors at Borderlands, as are many writers who have been there. It's a really great store. And Jude and Alan are terrific people, the people who own it. Okay, so moving on. This is another high-level decade thing. How many conventions did you go to?
In the last 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, oh Pete. I'm going to say, been doing about 4 or 5 conventions a year, 10 years. So I'm going to go and say 20.
35.
35 conventions?
Yeah, and I'm counting like the Mendocino Coast Writers
Of course.
that you did last
Those
year,
are
which
all
is more
important.
a conference than it is. It's not a fan convention. It's a working conference. Things like that. You went to
35?
O'Reilly. Yeah.
Jiminy Christmas.
Yeah, you presented at O'Reilly, also a conference, but
Yep.
sort of the same. I'm counting that. But yeah, I think you're not remembering those because those turn out to be quite a lot of fun. Even
Yep.
when they're a ton of work, they're a ton
There
of
was
fun.
all those conferences like that, not the cons. Cons are a lot of work, but conferences are more, you got to put together a slide deck and all that other stuff. So
How many T-shirts have you designed? Has Scott Pond designed? How many different T-shirt designs has Empty Set created? Has Scott Pond created?
I'm
for Empty Set?
literally counting T-shirts behind you that I can see right now. So
That's
there's
totally cheating.
as many as 4.
No turning around to look behind you.
I'm going to go back to 20. That's my go-to number, 20.
25 designs.
Holy
that
cats.
includes one-offs like the Keep Calm and Run the Plays that I call.
Oh, yeah.
And the Siglerfest t-shirts, which are small run for people who attend. And there's a few sometimes on the site, but
Sure.
mostly for people who attend.
Okay.
And of those 25 designs, we've sold roughly 8,000 t-shirts.
What?
Yeah.
We sold 8,000 fucking T-shirts?
Yeah.
Holy
we still have
shit.
a whole bunch though. So go to scottsigler.com/store, buy anything you'd like.
Yes. Grab them T-shirts, y'all. 8,000?
Yeah.
Jiminy Christmas. That's a lot of T-shirts. Wow. Cool.
So the biggest deal that we
That's a
made,
lot of T-shirts, man.
in case you guys haven't been able to tell this yet, I did all this prep work, and a lot of this is news to Mr. Sigler. So
Yeah.
he's not yet over the 8,000 T-shirts. So the biggest business deal that we made in the last decade was the creation of Empty Set.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many people know that, but we started with a handshake agreement in 2009.
Yes.
And you were essentially a sole proprietor.
I was.
And then we just, we split the costs and but it was all just handshake. And then in 2013, we formed Empty Set. Before that, we were known as Dark Overlord Media. And I think we would still be Dark Overlord Media if we could have gotten the rights to that business name in California. But we couldn't. Can't remember why, but we couldn't.
Okay.
We ended up as Empty Set Entertainment, and that was in April of 2013.
Yep.
So that's the best business decision that I made in the last decade. I don't know about you.
Yeah, but it was the best. When I emailed you for help with the rookie, that was the best business decision I've ever made.
So we as a company, either as Dark Overlord in the handshake agreement or officially as Empty Set, we have worked with lots of the big six. We've worked with Crown, we've worked with Random House, we've worked with Del Rey, certainly with Audible, and we're working with Titan. We'll talk about at the end of this episode, we'll talk about Phalanx, which comes out next month from Titan.
Yes.
And then, of course, we created Siglerfest.
Yes.
Siglerfest, as you all know, if you're listening to this, is a fan appreciation weekend. We do it in Las Vegas now.
I don't know if you say we created Siglerfest. You created Siglerfest.
I honestly think the Junkies created Siglerfest. I think the need for it was fomenting. And so we were like, well, the very first one we did as a proof of concept, we talked to the great folks at Balticon and said, you guys already have we're coming. You have a lot of fans coming, of Scott's fans coming. Would you be okay with us doing like a mini convention afternoon the day before that's just in one room, that's just Siglerfest? We'll have all our stuff in and out. The only thing that'll have to happen is you guys set up that big main room. Back in the day, it was at a place called the Hunt Valley Inn, and there was one big ballroom and garden room, I think it was called, and that's where we had ours. And they had to set it up for all of their big events, and they were great. They were like, well, I mean, if you will let us get in there, because we rented the room for that day, which is normally the day that they prep. So they saved a tiny bit of money, but we also let them prep all their stuff, all their setup in the background or whatever. And then we set up our little shindig.
Yeah.
And it was successful. So then from there, since the proof of concept, we've been doing them in Las Vegas, and they grow about 15% every year, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. The biggest one that we've had was this last one. So that's kind of fun. I don't know. I know that this sort of thing is a thing that some writers do. I don't know of anybody else who's done it for so long, though.
Yeah.
And grown up there.
Jeremy Robinson has a regular one, I think. And that's about all I know as far as authors doing their own. It's very limited.
and he has a different model. His is more like hey, let's all go do this thing together.
Yeah, like they did whitewater rafting one year.
Exactly. And I think they might have done fishing or whatever. And that's a great model because then, everybody's engaged and whatever, but a little different than ours. Okay, and then it's important to note. I think I'll do this. I didn't prep you for this, but you can talk about whatever you'd like.
Okay.
We also have had a lot of personal changes. You, of course, moved in 2014 from San Francisco to San Diego.
Correct, Mundo.
And we both started Empty Set married to other people.
Yep,
and now we
did.
are both divorced.
Yep.
But I know that the Evil Queen is a friend of mine and you talked a lot about her on the cast, and I wondered if maybe you could give us an update.
Yeah, the Evil Queen is living in Michigan now. She's very close to her brother. She's there so she can be closer to her niece and her nephew, Sarah and Joshi. Mm-hmm. And she's getting to see them do soccer and some things like that.
Oh, fun.
And she's still got some issues with her back, which she is working on. But yeah, she's over there, and she's a huge football fan. So we talk all through football season, and still good pals, and she's doing great. So everybody who's been asking about the Evil Queen, she's still in recovery mode, doing rehab stuff, and is doing pretty good.
And then she moved. Was that 2016? Did she move? I think. Yeah, I think 16.
Yeah, and that was a hell of an ordeal.
Yeah, I bring it up only because it's hopefully far enough in the past for you to talk a little bit about.
I had to block it out. It was a traumatic trip. She couldn't fly, and sitting in a car seat for a certain amount of time would cause her back to hurt. So we rented a 40-foot Cruise America RV, which is basically, it's like a battleship on wheels. Or no, you know what? Like a Spanish galleon, because it's a sail. Something that big is literally catches the wind and moves all over the place. And we drove, and we both stayed in the Winnebago. So that was 5 days. 5 days driving cross country, and sleeping at truck stops and stuff like that, because she had trouble getting in and out of the Winnebago too. So she didn't want to do hotels or anything like that. And it was just, and we did I did the majority of the driving. She had one friend who drove a little bit, but you had to drive very smoothly, because any sudden bumps or things would hurt her back, because she had a back issue at the time. And every pothole, every big chunk of gravel was all very difficult for her. So it was emotionally draining. Obviously, very difficult for her, emotionally draining for me, because she was in pain a lot, and that was difficult. And so I was very cautious about letting her friend drive, because
you had been driving her around.
Yeah, I've been driving around San Diego and San Francisco for years. So like I know exactly the best way to drive her so her back wouldn't hurt. So, but I needed sleep too, and I couldn't drive 18 hours a day. So we let the friend drive, and then we stop at one place to switch over. And I walked the friend through everything, and I sound like an asshole. I'm like, okay, you have to accelerate slowly. You have to brake slowly. You have to give yourself lots of room on all turns. And I sound like grandpa teaching another grandpa how to drive. And the friend's not really paying attention, because she knows how to drive. She's a grown ass human being. And then we pulled into a Dunkin' Donuts that had a drive-through, and we switched over, give her the lecture, get in the back, and we pull around the Dunkin' Donuts, and the friend drove through the Dunkin' Donuts drive-through.
Oh Lord.
Which I think the Winnebago was 16 and a half feet high, and it was a 15-foot clearance. we drove under the drive-through, wrecked one of the air conditioners on the RV, ground down the top. It was a brand new, we were the second people to ever drive this particular vehicle. And we got the RV stuck in the drive-through. Mm. And I was of the mind, I went into the Dunkin' Donuts and said, we just drove it into your drive-through, and we're going to get out of here as soon as possible so you guys get back to business. Because what I didn't want to do is stick around for the cops to show up and have Jody have to sit in that thing for another 6 or 7 or 8 hours or whatever.
Would have been terrible, yeah.
Would have been terrible. And that was like day 3.5. So she was already in bad shape. So I had to borrow a shovel and a crowbar. I had to go up and...
Because those are the right tools.
Those are the right tools. And I had to break off part of the air conditioner to get the thing free from the overpass. And oh my God, you guys, you have no idea how many virulent pathogens are lying inside of the overhang on a drive-through. I cracked it open, and there's bird nests falling out, and rotten pine needles, and rat turds, and a couple of mice, and dead things. It was just, and all this stuff's raining all over me trying to get the RV out of the way. It was very, very gross.
So it was a fun summertime trip.
It was a super fun summertime trip. But we got Diva Queen over there, and she's been over about 3 years now and doing her own thing. So there you go. Moving on.
So keeping with the catching up with your family, another very big thing happened in the last decade to your nephew.
Yeah. Tyler was signed by the Arizona Cardinals and got to go to Arizona Cardinals, all the preseason stuff, all the training camp. Just missed the cut to make the final team. After they signed him, they drafted 2 safeties, and he's a safety. So we had one safety, I think, from Alabama and one from Washington State, both high-level guys.
And they already had Devontae Adams, who then they cut.
Yeah, they were pretty well stacked at defensive back, even though they had a terrible year. And Tyler just missed the cut, and Tyler has been thinking about it. So I don't think I've told anybody yet.
Yeah, I think you might have mentioned it on Facebook.
But
I don't think that we've talked about it on the cast yet.
Tyler has been signed by the Toronto Argonauts.
Woohoo.
And if he will, it's the same deal with the Cardinals. He will go up to Toronto, and he will, even though he's a signed player, he still has to make the final roster. If he makes the final roster, then A&R are going up to Toronto on June 20th for the home opener. So we're wishing him very well. But for a football-focused family, it was a very good time.
Yeah.
And then his brother, Caden, had a stellar senior season with Wheaton, the Wheaton Thunder. And they went undefeated in the regular season and made it to the quarterfinals and lost in an absolute heartbreaking thriller by 1 point in the quarterfinals. And then, so they were 1 game away from playing for the national championship in Division III. So he also had a huge year.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of the last decade. I want to move into specifically some things in 2019, and then we'll talk about 2020.
All right.
For just catching up, I think we talked specifically already about some of this, but in 2019, we did 5 conventions or cons or convention. We did Cleveland Concoction, which was super fun. Tiny con in Cleveland.
Yep.
They couldn't have been nicer. The bookseller was legitimately like a neighborhood book, or a nearby bookseller who wasn't necessarily going to come out. And then I wasn't ready for that con to be as small as it was. So this poor Amy, the woman who ran it was so lovely. She emailed me like, "Hey, can you send like 10 or 12 of you each book?" And I wrote back like, "Cool, I'll need a pallet. That's 750 pounds. Does this hotel have a loading dock?" Things that are normal things if I'm shipping things to something like Dragon Con or Comic Con or something.
Right.
This poor, oh my goodness, what an idiot I was. Like, I should have thought about it. Like, this is a convention which is probably 500 people. And so she wrote back like, "Well, I don't know. Why would you need a pallet?" Like, because most people
it's mostly local
regional,
authors who show up with their box of books.
Yeah, they're bringing a couple cases of books. And so once I realized that, I was like, okay, let's pull back the reins a tiny bit. They couldn't have been nicer folks. They were there. It was super nice for you to get to go. We got to meet a couple of really, Michael and Matt, both Michael who invited you and managed all of the getting the invitation done. Longtime junkies, really nice, really great folks, really fun to hang out with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a pretty good time. So that was Cleveland Concoction. We go to San Diego every year. San Diego Comic-Con is about 10 blocks away from our office.
Yep.
And so you're normally, I don't know how it'll be this year because the deadlines have been so screwy, but normally you're just finishing a book around the time that Comic-Con happens. So you get to go mostly play at Comic-Con. You maybe do 1 or 2 panels, but not very much. I don't know how it'll be this year because applications don't come out until April. But we probably will go to Comic-Con, but we won't do very much at Comic-Con.
Right.
We'll go as fans and friends and not really do much work at Comic-Con this year.
Yes.
But you went to Comic-Con last year by yourself because I was stuck in Ira, Texas.
That's correct.
On the weekend of the 4th of July, I was driving to visit a friend in Austin, friends in Austin, and hit a javelina, which is about 100-pound furry pig. And it did $14,000 worth of damage to my car, and stuck me.
That was worth $18,000 to start with.
$20,000.
$20,000. Okay.
And had me stuck in a teeny tiny town called Ira, Texas, for 2.5 weeks. They had no stop sign. No, they had no ATM machine.
Yeah.
They had no stop signal. Yeah. No, maybe they had one by the highway. The whole town is about a mile long on the one main strip. The tow truck driver, who was lovely, brought me to the quote-unquote good hotel.
Yeah, the good side of town.
The good side of town. I just mentioned it's a mile long. There was, like I said, no ATM machine. It was the 4th of July when that happened, so there were no restaurants open. It had the dogs with me.
Yeah, you had 2 dogs, and it was how hot every day was
About
it?
106 was the average. So I was
yeah.
ill prepared to be in the West Texas desert with 2 dogs, and everybody, it was so funny. I will tell you, I grew up in New York City. I was absolutely unprepared to deal with that kind of isolation. I did not do well at all.
No, it was not a good time for
I had to
you.
wake up at like 5:30 every morning to walk the dogs in the dark
Before it got hot.
because they didn't have booties, which all the dogs in Iran have booties because the asphalt gets so hot. And everybody was like, well, you could order them. I'm like, dude, if I could order them, I would, but it'll take 5 days to get here. And I
Right.
kept thinking I would not be there 5 days later. Turns out I would have been there. So I'd wake up early, walk
Yeah.
the dogs, stay inside all day. And then at 9 o'clock, I would walk down to the grocery store, which was absolutely on the other end of town, but again, a mile, bring the dogs. It was so hot at 9 p.m. that the people in the grocery store immediately knew me. Also, my name is A.
Yeah.
And that's actually really my name. So it's on my credit cards. So they knew that was my name.
Right.
And they would come in and they'd be like, hey, how are you? They were super creepy if you're
Yeah.
a New York City girl
Word-
that everybody knew your name.
It was such a small town. Word had spread of the stranger who had hit the javelina. So when she walked in, everybody automatically knew it was her because
You were
they
that
see
girl
the
who
same
done hit the
faces.
pig.
You're that girl. Are you that girl done hit the pig? Because they know everyone they see. There's a stranger. It's got to be A.
And literally, everybody couldn't have been nicer. It was,
Yeah.
and they were nice to the dogs. You're not supposed to let the dogs into the grocery store, but they would let me tie them to the ice machine just inside the door so that they wouldn't be too hot at 9 p.m. at night. So I wasn't here. I actually got back on the day that we had.
Don't forget about your experience with the other wildlife at Iran.
Oh, Dinny?
No, the fire ants.
Oh my goodness.
On top of everything else, she stepped on a fire ant hill and it was just covered in nasty welts. It was
Oh
a
my
terrible,
goodness.
terrible time.
I stopped counting. Also, must have gotten some kind of bug or something inside my shirt. So I stopped counting at 65 bites.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was
Good
terrible.
times. Okay, so
Yeah.
you get back here.
So you get back here on the day that we had planned for months to have an empty set open house. And
Yeah.
you were like, you know what? I'm canceling it. And we have junkies, we had junkies from Kansas, the Hattridges were coming. We had all these people coming to the party. And I was like, I've been alone for 2.5 weeks. I drove 17 hours the day before to get back here. And you were like, canceling the party. I'm like, please don't. Oh my goodness, I lasted maybe 13 minutes. And then I was like, I'm super exhausted. Can all these people go home? Which they couldn't do, but it worked out fine. And then I think I slept till 2 the next day.
Yes.
So San Diego Comic-Con, then we went. So the good news is that was a terrible trip for me this summer. But then after that, we went to the Mendocino Coast Writers Conference.
Super fun.
And gorgeous.
Stayed in the hotel where they shot Murder, She Wrote.
Where they shot Murder, She Wrote. And you had a great time. You taught, it was the first time that they sat a spec fic faculty.
That means speculative fiction, which is horror and science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And fantasy, I believe, is also speculative fiction, yeah.
And tell us about it. From my perspective, you had a great time.
It was pretty fun. We had a great class. People who, I call them aspiring writers, which sometimes you get shit for from pedantic authors online. Like,
Everyone's an author.
they just haven't sold yet. So anyways, these people working away. I was able to share what information I had on writing and the topics I go into that not everybody does, which is building a fan base, interacting with your fans, how to plan 10, 20 years ahead and how to set expectations where you're not going to see anything happen for 5 to 7 years and get, a lot of that stuff. Kind of the opposite of rah-rah, which is you are embarking on a course that's going to take a long time before anything happens for you. And did all that, and it was pretty cool. So it's another small little town, and
it's
the scenery
stunning.
was unbelievable.
Yeah.
If you like ocean vistas, Mendocino is great to go to. So we had
Absolutely
a great time
another teensy tiny town, and you would go to work, and then I would leave the hotel. Every time I left the hotel in Texas, I would lose internet service, and I wouldn't get it back for an hour until I got back. In Mendocino, the first time I went out, I lost all cell phone coverage. And I was like, okay, here we go again. It lasted 2 minutes. It was fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was great. And then at the closing night party, I had this neat interaction with one of your students who you had given them the piece of advice, which everybody listening has probably heard. If you've seen So You Want to Be a Writer, our YouTube series, where you say, put if you write something, finish it, put it in a drawer, don't look at it for 6 months.
Right.
Then read it again.
Right.
So at the closing night party, we're chatting and they don't know me and we say hello and whatever. And they say, oh, he was my teacher. And he told me that, like, you should put it down for 6 months. And I was like, well, I wrote things 3 years ago I haven't looked at. And I called up the ebook and they're terrible. And I was like, they're not terrible. They need a little polishing. She's like, nope, they're terrible.
No, they're terrible. They're terrible.
And I loved that. So then we did that. And then Dragon Con.
Yes. Always fun.
Always fun. And then Siglerfest this year. And that was the cons that you did.
What a blowout party that was.
Yeah, it was good.
Just
it was good.
Killer party.
So the biggest, I think, disaster of 2019 for me might have been the launch of the Gangster. We did all the things we were supposed to do. We hired a new new server. We got a dedicated server just to sell our books.
We hired the company that did the online contest and registration for the Country Music Awards.
Oh, yes, the online voting, yes.
The online voting for the CMAs. So they're getting a lot of hits during the CMAs. And we tried to explain to them, like, okay, we believe you when you say you can do this. We just want you to understand you're going to get hammered. In a very short amount of time, you're going to get hammered. Like, yeah, we got this. So we went out and spent, because obviously we've crashed every server we've had for this. We went out and spent the big bucks to get a big boy company with a daddy pants on or whatever you want to call it. And what happened when
crashed the server faster than ever before?
Crashed server immediately because people were just lurking. Yeah. Before the thing came up and just crashed right away.
We actually unbuilt that whole thing, and I understand. And I will say that, I went to them and said, I don't know anything about anything, how to make sure this doesn't happen. So for me, I feel like part of their job was to look at my exact plan, which was in writing.
Yeah.
And tell me, oh, yeah, so this is probably more work than you need, right? But I did make a redirect that was contributing to the problem. They knew I was going to make that redirect. So I feel like it's frustrating because I went to them and said, I know nothing. I need your expertise. They were like, cool, this looks great, hon. And did nothing.
It's beyond frustrating. I mean, they gave us all or some of our money back.
Yeah, most of our money back.
So I mean, we weren't hurt that bad by it, but the amount of money we spent on that was significant.
Well, and the amount of man hours, we'll talk about that a little bit in the next, when we're talking about 2020, but the amount of time that I have spent and will spend making sure that everyone's order is intact is enormous. So the actual cost to our business is much higher than the money that we
lose our asses on these books.
And the big thing is the one thing I'll never know, and it'll be a problem, is if somebody thinks they ordered that book and got some sort of confirmation, which I don't think is likely, but it's possible, and I don't know about it. Because then the ordering the number of the book that they get is screwed up. Everything is screwed up, and I can't do anything about that.
We'll do the best we can with it.
We'll do the best we can, and it's a shame. And we have time before the next book to figure out what we're going to do. But I honestly don't know. But now that all of that is done, I think moving into we had a busy year where we're trying to close out deadlines, and we're still going to be doing that some in 2020. So I think we did have one leftover question from last week's Q&A that I think is relevant. Do you think I can play it? Because it'll start off the 2020 convo.
Sure, let's do it.
Let me find it.
And for those of you listening at home, Reese, the dog of doom, is on the desk while we're recording this. So we have a recording table set up, and she's at the end of the table, nose covered in a blanket, all curled up in a little dog bed, hanging out. So she is with us. She's with you in spirit.
Okay, so this is from Randy. And like I said, came in too late, but here we go.
Hey, Scott. This is Randy from Boston. Got a question for you as a creator. How do you balance the need to create new content with a fan or even personal desire to revisit favorites like, The Rabbi and Big Ugly or returning to the Crypt? How do you figure out what you're going to do next?
It's always a challenge, which has been compounded by my particular obsession with trying to give the readers and the fans what they want. And, and that combined with my horrible ADD and like, oh, here's a good idea. I'll go write this. And then the last part of the triumvirate of doom in that regard is my inability to predict how long it will take to actually write something. So years ago, I'd be like, great, I'll write this short story for this thing. Or like that was the Night Attack podcast. And they wanted to come up with kind of a pitch for a story while I was a guest in the show. And I'm like, it'll take me a couple of days to write. And it takes a lot longer to write that. When you do that, that pushes out the deadlines for the bigger books, the novels, which is where we make all of our money, is on the novels. And if we're going to come back to these shorter stories or these other things, doing that takes time away from what actually puts, what actually keeps us in business, which is the novels. So as far as things like The Rabbi and Big Ugly, now that we've retooled our business, we have refocused on the novel writing, and we are way behind on the novel writing, which we'll get to shortly on this very podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
Way behind on things, and fans have been waiting a long time. So with all the short stories, the anthologies, the collections, all the different things we've done for different podcasts, et cetera, we're letting most of that go so we can focus on finishing up the GFL series and getting at the Crypt, getting Mount Fitzroy done, et cetera. So I don't expect to see a sequel to The Rabbi and Big Ugly, which is a shame. But we have other stuff out there that's just, I'd originally planned for all these Kissy Man stories. And I mean, we will eventually have at least one more Hunter Henderson and Son trilogy out. But the bigger, my books are getting bigger. Fitzroy's 250,000 words. And the amount of focus it takes to keep track of all the moving parts in that is almost beyond my ability to handle. If I interrupt that to write a story somewhere along the line, then all that stuff goes away and I kind of have to start over with keeping all the moving parts in my head.
For sure.
So we are primarily focused on novels now, and we are primarily focused on getting the novels done that we have talked to you guys about getting done. Fitzroy, GFL Book 6, and eventually moving on to the Crypt.
Yeah. And that's, you mentioned a little bit the retooling that we did. And I mentioned a little bit at the top of the hour, about 2.5 years ago, we sat down. We were sort of hitting terminal velocity. We were missing things. I was pretty much always just putting out fires. I couldn't get ahead and do any kind of strategic planning because I was always dealing on the thing that had absolutely the biggest deadline. Okay. And I'm glad that we did that about 2.5 years ago. We sort of started to cull the things that you thought you might want to do before you die to the, okay, well, let's get these done so we can see what's coming. Because another thing that doesn't show up quite a lot yet, but is still part of your 2019 is you did a couple of screenplays. And the way that works and the way the transition will work for your writing from novel writing to what I call AV writing, and that's not the right way to say that, but script writing of some sort, is it's the same work. It's still writing, it's still creating, but it's quite different. And so we had to take time to do some of that. And I think that, you guys have favorite characters, as do I. My favorite story of all time that you've written is Red Man, which I will never see an exploration of because our short story collections don't sell all that well. And they certainly, they sell well, but they don't sell well compared to the rest of our books. People like your long form writing better. They just do. And so when we look at a short story like the first Hunter Henderson and think about, can we grow that into a universe that is fun and viable and sellable, and you will still enjoy creating, some things don't scale that way. And certainly The Rabbi is one of those things that I don't think we could, some people might love 600,000 words about that. But I don't think that's a saleable product in the same way a big, expansive universe like The Rookie is. So that's another one of the things that we had to do. And it's interesting because we have been working this plan for quite a while, and 2019 just spanked us. We were so busy.
Got crushed.
And part of the reason for that I want to talk a little bit about now is this is the first time in your career where you've experienced a significant difference between how long you think a story will take to write and how long it actually does. That's always nebulous. It's always 2 or 3 weeks one way or the other. This is months and months. And I want to talk about that because that's the first time that's ever happened to you with the way the last 2 books have sort of worked with the editors is different. Yeah.
The last 2 books worked with the editors is, what would we count? Is that Fitzroy we're counting in that? Yeah.
Fitzroy and Phalanx, yeah.
Fitzroy and Phalanx. Aliens Phalanx, written for Titan Books, official Aliens tie-in novel out February 25th. They have a different approach to this than we do. Usually I write an outline and then I send the outline to the various secret agents, be they military, doctor, cops, etc. And then I correct the outline, write another outline. Then I write a first draft and go in from there. And then, like I mentioned, Julian Pavia for Random House earlier. When I wrote Nocturnal, I got a 27-page letter back from him, single spaced, that with everything that was wrong with it, suggestions, all the other stuff, etc. And that has become part of my writing process, which is to get other people's eyes on it, because when you write the style of story I write, which I call a Satanic Seinfeld episode, because there's all these different threads that have to come together and thread in a certain way to get to that over the top finale where you as the reader are like, I didn't know where it was going, but that feels like a complete story. So when the story's done, there's no cliffhangers. You are set, and you paid your money for that one story and you're done. Part of that process is getting the crap kicked out of the story. And for Phalanx, I didn't get very heavy edits back. And
which I guess for a young writer or new writers might think that's a great thing.
It was not. I mean, for most writers, because we are, even though I know we get things wrong with the stories, I know we make mistakes, and I know there's stuff I miss. We are obsessed with quality plots and a full sense of final resolution of the story. So we try not to introduce a character. We spend 20 pages with them, never see them again, et cetera, things like that. We want everything to come together at the end. And with as many moving parts as I have in the stories, that's a very tough job to do. And I can't keep track of everything as well as I would like to tell the quality story that I want. So getting that feedback is really important. So for Phalanx, they were very happy with the story as it initially went, but I was like, I didn't get that amount of pushback that I need as part of the process. It's like when you think a door's stuck, so you go to lean into it really hard and it's not stuck at all and you just fall right through the door.
Yeah.
It's along those lines. I didn't have that resistance. And then for Mount Fitzroy, which we have sold and we'll talk about later, we still can't talk about who we sold it to. It was the same thing. We got very light notes back for that era of the draft that I was in. And that oddly caused more time because I had to go back through and find a lot of these errors myself, and with John Biscar and other people helping out too. So I would build it and then unbuild it and then redo it. And as strange as it sounds, not getting a heavy edit back on my earlier drafts made for a longer process.
Much longer process. Yeah. And I think it's, what I saw watching you do this was more like you had to eventually become that sort of Shiv voice in your head. You used to call Julian Pavia the Shiv.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had to create a version of that yourself where you were critical, sort of super critical in a different way or hypercritical in a different way of your own stuff. And I've said this a bunch. Scott wears headphones when he writes in the office so that he stays less distracted. And so sometimes, and he listens to music. And so often he will talk out loud, like say something like, yeah, that's my jam, to a piece of music. But during these two books, the process was like, no, wait a minute. Is that crap or is that okay? And you had to then stop, go back, find the problem you thought you might have, decide whether or not it was a problem, and then build it and unbuild it. And that, we estimated that the remaining edits of Fitzroy would take about another 4 months or so when we sold the book, and they took it'll be about 9.
Yeah.
And some of that isn't us. A little bit of that in the beginning was the publishing house, but a lot of it was just the system.
It's a giant story. Right now it's 250,000 words. That's 3 novels, basically 3 decent sized thriller novels.
Right.
It's the size of a George R. Martin type story. So, and the biggest thing we found with Mount Fitzroy is I'm not going to submit it to the publisher until I am done and everything is done right. And with that many moving parts, it is exponentially slower trying to keep track of the number of threads that are in Mount Fitzroy, to the point where, even though we can't tell you who we sold it to, we are literally in danger of losing that contract. And we totally understand it. If they're like, yeah, you guys just took too long, we can't do this. No, we understand. But that's the level. It sounds pretentious to say, but that is the level of quality with the story that we're going for. Fans have been waiting 15 friggin' years for the story. The people who've been with us from the beginning.
Right.
I want to make sure what they get is absolutely fucking spectacular.
And you know, your name goes on it.
Yeah. Yes.
Forever. So it has to be a story that you're willing to tell. So that is, I think, an encapsulation of the big issues that we faced in 2019. Just the kind of the doing it right, no matter what that means, turns out to have taken quite a lot longer and is still the right answer. And we're lucky enough that we're a business that can be flexible enough to do that, and flexible enough to say, like, yes, I understand we may have to pay you back,
Right.
but we're still going to do this.
Right.
And hopefully we can sort all that out.
I think it's going to be okay, but I mean, we're pushing our luck.
Right.
As
And
it
the
is.
book is still, as you mentioned at the top of this hour, almost done. It's 92% done.
Yes.
So all that said, we'll talk a little bit about the rest of 2020, but I'll say I am absolutely confident, hell or high water, this publisher or us personally or a different publisher, Fitzroy will come out in 2020.
It's coming out. Whether if it's not with them, it's going to be through us, but it's definitely coming out.
And then the other thing that you were working on quite a lot in 2019 was GFL VI.
Yes.
And technically, you were working on GFL VI and what has now become GFL VII.
Yes.
You wrote I think the second draft, and you had a whole bunch of secret agents read it, and several of them sort of came back and said, "This is 2 books."
Yeah.
And you collaborated with J.C. Hutchins
On a novella.
and he also was.
Oh, that's right.
He
yes.
did some review and some work with you on 6, and he was the one who sort of said, like, you could break it up right here, and that might be the better answer to split them.
Yeah, and it was Hutch was helpful in that, looking at this giant ass book that we had written to see that it was indeed two separate stories. There was
right, stories.
There was a definitive end to story A before we started story B.
Right.
And so we took a hard look at that, and then there's also the financial reality for us. Like the book I was writing for book 6, which initially was supposed to end the series at 6, was so fucking big it was going to cause us all kinds of problems. We were sweating that, and then I looked at him like, you're right. This is a story of the beginning, a middle, and an end. It ends here, and then we can move over to book 7.
I remember, yeah.
And then I was able to flesh both out.
Right. And you are, as a writer, you so often sort of intertwine and thread things together that once you took a look at it that way, and it's like, okay, if I pull out these 3 elements, then each story flows completely.
Yes. And this, I'll give you a slight spoiler. This one is a little bit different because all the other books have involved one fixed football season in the Kraken's franchise. In book 6 and 7, I won't tell you why, but they do not follow the same exact model. So now we got 6 almost done, and then 7, and then eventually we'll get to 8.
Yeah, and it's a funny thing because rightfully so, people understand people who loved Game of Thrones get a little bit fussy that George R.R. Martin hasn't caught up yet, and that kind of thing. But I got to tell you, it's a wild thing to be on the other side of this and know that in 2019 you wrote 900,000 words.
Yeah.
It's an enormous amount.
And in 2020, we're going to publish over 500,000 words.
Right. And
so
that's
publish.
Yeah. And so it's hard. It doesn't make any difference to the consumer, to the customer, to the fan, because they can't get at any of that until we put it out.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have a lot more confidence saying, well, 6 will come out in 2020 and Phalanx will come out in, Phalanx is on its way, but Fitzroy, because I know how complete they are. And so I'm not that worried, but I certainly see it from a customer and a fan perspective.
Okay.
So we're almost done. We do have 3 real big things that we need to talk about.
We save the big news for the end.
I mentioned at the top of the hour. I will tell you now, there's no spoiler alerting, but all 3 of these are hard for me to talk about, hard for us to talk
They're
about.
very hard for us to talk about. Let's get into
The
it.
first one is that, so we've made some decisions that hopefully will help us get back on track, doing new things, getting to the crypt, doing all that jazz, and make fiscal sense for our business and make sense for us as human beings.
Yeah, and I'll
have to sleep.
Interrupt you briefly before we get into this. Sometimes we have to remind the fans, the junkies, who are all awesome, that A and I run a business. This is a business, and sometimes we have to make business decisions to make sure we keep this ship afloat, keep going, because these are our jobs, is running this business. So although we would love to follow our heart on many different areas and do many different things. At times we have to sit down and be like, okay, we have to do this because people are interested in it, and that will provide great revenue. That's our revenue for 2021, for example. Or look at another thing like that's not tenable at this particular time. So
Right. So the first decision that we made for 2020 is that Empty Set will not go to any conventions or conferences.
correct.
They are fun for us. They also work for us, and they're also expensive.
They're expensive, and for some earlier on, I used to be better at working during a con, working in a hotel room during a con, and continuing to put out word count, which I am not alone in that. All kinds of authors do authors
For sure, yeah.
all are writing while they're at a con. But I found my quality of work at the con wasn't that great. And frankly, when I go to a con and I get to hang out with Delilah Dawson, Kevin Hearn, and Mike Cole and Sam Sykes and all those people, like now that I've developed friendships with other authors, I don't want to be in the room writing anymore.
Of course. And that's reasonable. You're a human being.
Yes. And that detracts from the quality of work I do in the hotel room because I'm not as focused. I'm like, oh, this would be so fun to go hang out with all these great people. So we've decided that while we are behind the curve, we're behind 8 balls, what I was looking for. On the deadlines, they all got to go.
Yeah.
They all got to. So if you guys are at all those cons or expecting to see us in 2020 at Dragon Con, all the other places, our apologies. We will be back home, nose to the grindstone, getting work done.
And I will make a special note that San Diego Comic-Con, as I mentioned earlier in the hour, is here in our town and about 10 blocks from the office. So I think it's possible that we might do something at San Diego Comic-Con, like attend or meet up, or whatever. Yeah. But none of that is, you should plan for none of that if you're coming to San Diego.
If you come to San Diego Comic-Con, keep your ears open. Watch the Twitter @ScottSigler, Instagram @ScottSigler, Facebook.com/ScottSigler. Sign up for our newsletter, for crying out loud. Go to ScottSigler.com, sign up for the newsletter. It's the best newsletter. I've asked all the right people. It's the best newsletter in the world, and you will be notified of what's going on. But that is the only chance you'll have to see me during the con season is possibly at San Diego Comic-Con.
Okay, number 2. Ooh, this is a big one.
All right, here we go.
There will not be a Sigler Fest in 2020.
No.
I'll say it again, just in case you're like, wait, what? There won't be a Sigler Fest in 2020.
We are not stopping the Sigler Fest. We're going to get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
But Sigler Fest X is not going to happen in 2020. This has been a very, very difficult decision for us to make. Sigler Fest chews up an enormous amount of time. It is more a time question than a finances question, although it does cost us an arm and a leg to put that on for everybody.
Yeah. And there were a handful of things. So we were unable, we always knew this, at the last Sigler Fest, which was at the South Point in Las Vegas, I mentioned a couple of times on the mic from the stage that we always knew we couldn't go to the South Point for that weekend in 2020. Uh-huh. And I was looking at other venues and I was looking at other dates, and I polled everybody to see if they cared if it was on Indigenous Peoples Weekend, did that matter having that sort of holiday on the Monday? And everybody's like, yeah, I didn't even know that. I don't care. Mm-hmm. So I started to look at other venues. I flew out for a day to Las Vegas earlier this year, right after the new year, to look at other hotels. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, we had a handful of feedback about a month ago, maybe a little bit more. You mentioned on the Sunday podcast that we were thinking that this Sigler Fest might be our last one.
Correct.
And you almost exclusively said that might be our last one. Mm-hmm. And the discussion that ensued seemed, I don't know why, but everybody ran with it like there would be only one more. Mm-hmm. And then we started to talk about that, and we thought, okay, well, it takes up, it's like 2 months of my time. It's a significant part of our budget. And okay.
When she says takes up 2 months of her time, she's like, it's a full-time job for 2 months in a 2-person company. So even though I do some work for Sigler Fest, basically we've lost 2 months out of 12 months of A's work for all the other stuff that we do, which is just as critical as the writing.
Yeah, and part of that is because we need to make sure we get the right deal or do the right work and not spend all the money, because we want to give all that to the people who attend Sigler Fest. If we're spending money, we want that, as much of that dollar, to be something that everybody benefits from at the actual event. So there were a handful of things. So when that conversation started about the last Sigler Fest, we got a few emails that were relevant to our considerations. And one was, we got a handful of ex-US junkies, folks who don't live here in the States, saying, gosh, had I known, I mean, 10 months is not a lot of time. I don't know if I'll be able to do this.
Right.
And I desperately wanted to get to a Sigler Fest. And so that was one. Another was...
So what you're saying there is we are, by pushing it off a year, we're giving our non-US junkies plenty of time to plan to hopefully get to that one, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And we eventually decided, I'll just say this now, we eventually decided not to push it off a whole year. So the last Sigler Fest, Sigler Fest X,
Yep.
will begin on Sigler Ascension Day in 2021.
Which is pretty fun. That's good news and bad news. It's great that we have the April Fool's Day, Sigler Ascension Day for the closure.
So that's a Thursday, and Thursdays is always a concert. And so Sigler Fest X will start on that day and will run through the 3rd. As normal, we do programming on Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Saturday.
Yeah.
And then there's football Sundays, which of course there will not be because it won't be football season. But another hiccup is that Sunday is Easter Sunday.
Yes.
And we spoke with a handful of our church-going and religious, specifically Christian and Catholic friends and family and junkies, and decided that isn't a motivator to not hold Sigler Fest on that weekend. We looked at a whole bunch of other weekends. Everyone was with the people that we were talking to about church-going, and they're, there's not one weekend that works for everybody.
Correct.
And so that is a thing that we decided that we are not going to move the date for, because finding another date before the rest of the con season starts and all that jazz is difficult. And we are going to work with the South Point to find houses of worship nearby if folks want to go and do that.
Sure. And the other reason for it is I'm pulling the My Goddamn Books card, which is my brother, Irv, is a football coach and has never been able to attend a Sigler Fest because he is knee-deep in football season throughout Columbus Day. And when you are a high school football coach in the state of Michigan, you really only have a couple of months off, and you're working all the time, the rest of the time. Just my dad and my brother, the hours they put in make me look like I'm a slacker. And I put in a lot of hours.
And that's really the only remaining thing that you wanted at Sigler Fest.
Correct.
Is you wanted your brother to be able to go.
My parents have been to the last three. And Irv, if Irv is going to get to one, this is the one. So I checked Irv's schedule with him. And Irv is also a very devout Christian. So we cleared it with him too. Like, it's going to be on Easter. He's like, no problem.
Yeah.
So hopefully Sigler Fest X will be April 1st, 2021 in Las Vegas. My brother will be there, and he will get to see what he refers to as the DEF CON levels of Scott, which is as things start to escalate, he gradually ticks off DEF CON 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 till we get to like DEF CON 13, and it should be great.
Yeah, and that actually was another. That was a big deal because otherwise your brother will never get to come.
Correct.
And then we have been talking about the deadlines, and we are still quite in the thick of it. Deadlines, and so adding this year where we're publishing 4 books and doing publicity for all of that, adding Sigler Fest, which takes so much of my time, sort of difficult. And then we did have a few that we have to consider, and I looked at other venues, but we had a few security issues at the end of the last Sigler Fest that now that we're big enough need consideration, and took me a little while after Sigler Fest to sort of suss out and figure out. And so then when I looked at other hotels in Las Vegas, the idea of working with somebody new who was unfamiliar with my needs was less appealing than moving the date and getting to stay at the South Point. And so that they're well aware of the granularity of the issues that I have had and won't have again, or won't be willing to have again. And so we have decided, we've contracted with the South Point for those dates. They're set. It'll be, if you went to Sigler Fest 9 or saw any of the pictures, it'll be in the same room, the Brunswick room. We're making a few changes. We may or may not add something on Sunday because we can't watch football.
Yeah, good
I will
point.
also sleep through that. But that's the news. That's all the news that's fit to print about Sigler Fest.
Okay.
I have to tell you guys listening, it killed us to make this decision.
Very difficult. Very difficult. Like 10 years in a row would have been awesome, but sometimes you can only push a boulder uphill so much, and then it rolls back and it crushes you flat. And I went through some burnout this year and just working nonstop on things. And part of that is Siglerfest and all the ever Siglerfest and all the cons and all the travel and sometimes and all these things and it's all getting in the way as the books get more intricate and the storytelling. I hope you guys will see the effort in the stories. And I think the other ones are pretty good. These upcoming ones, there's an enormous amount of moving parts. And they are, especially with GFL, which has to draw on 5 books going before it and all the novellas, and Fitzroy, which has to draw on Earthcore, it's so much harder to keep track of everything that I need these larger blocks of uninterrupted time to focus to get them done right. So this is an answer to part of the burnout and actually getting to have somewhat of a personal life on top of the work, which I haven't had for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And Siglerfest has got to go.
You know, we've talked about it a couple of times recently, that I genuinely believe, and I'll fight anybody who tells me otherwise, that you are a much better writer now that you are playing music again.
Totally. No question.
You are also a much nicer coworker. And I don't mean to say that you were not nice, but I
was grumpy a lot.
And you're much less grumpy now, because when you get grumpy, you take your lunch hour and practice your music.
Yeah.
And it's hard for you to be grumpy there. And that makes it, it's interesting. I say it all the time. You and I have, I think, different philosophies. I totally get from a fan perspective the idea that you should always be writing. But as your business partner who has to protect the only factory we have, which is you, it is also at times infuriating. And every single time that I see that, I no longer have any, vein popping out on my forehead about it. But every time I see it, I instinctively think, wait a minute. If the only thing you can do is produce and work, if that's the only thing a human is good for, how do you have time to read these books? Because you should be working every second of every day.
Yeah.
And I know that that's shitty because I'm a fan and I also want these books, but at the same time, the writing, the work suffers the more you suffer. And now we've seen that.
And I don't know how many people know, I've been a musician and a bass player for a long time. Like I used to be in bands way back when and got out of bands literally to focus more on the writing. Of course, I had a day job at the time too, but
right.
So this coming back to all this is very much coming home. The only time I'm not thinking about the books when I'm playing music, giving just like my goal for you guys is when you read one of my works, I take you completely out of your life. I own your thoughts. If I do my job correctly, I own your thoughts during the book. You don't think about anything but the book. So when you put the book down, your brain has had a chance to refresh and reboot. And hopefully you look at the rest of your life and go, oh, okay, I had a breather. Now I can get back in it and get to work. That is exactly what the music is for me. Because
right.
I can't watch a TV show, watch a movie. I can't read a book. I'm analyzing structure on everything I do when it comes to the written word or the visual medium. Nonstop work all the time. And anybody who's watched TV with me will tell you I'm a shitty person to watch TV with.
I will tell you. It is hard to watch TV
because I break everything down. But the music is completely different part of the brain and it's very helpful.
And in this little bit of burnout that you've had in 2019, we also learned that watching long form fiction with you, like we saw Jumanji, and that has a lot of problems, but is also pretty fun because it's enough of a departure from the type of work that you do, the type of intricate writing that you do, that you are able to kind of set that down and enjoy it a little bit.
Sure.
Which I found kind of interesting since you are a girthy, wordy writer, that TV shows difficult for you to sit through on your own. I think only The Good Place has passed muster recently.
And even The Good Place, which is possibly up there with my favorite TV show of all time, along with Battlestar Galactica, the reboot Battlestar Galactica. It's constant. I have to bite my tongue nonstop. So,
which is interesting because
the music's great.
If and when you get to, when eventually the plan is for you to move to more screenwriting, which might put you in a writer's room, in which case that skill set that you have honed your entire life will be incredibly useful because that is the point of the writer's room.
Yes.
Is to pick apart every little thing. So that's number 2 is really, really hard for us. I am sure you guys have a lot to say about it and we are here to listen to you. We understand the fraughtness of that decision.
If you're pissed off, you're frustrated about this, just communicate with us. Let us have it. We know this decision. People are going to be upset about it, and we are willing to sit in the trenches and talk to you guys and hopefully work it out because everybody listening to this, I want to keep you as a reader. I want to keep you as a fan. I want to keep you as part of the family.
Right. So number 3, and I will tell you in advance that number 3 was harder for us than number 2.
Okay.
And it will likely be harder for you guys than number 2. And number 3 which is our last one, is that we are pushing back the publication date of The Gangster.
Yeah.
Dude, this one hurts so bad.
Yes, this is because we promised. We like this time we were like, we guarantee it.
And we had a year.
Yeah.
So we promised when we put The Gangster on sale on that perfect seamless day last April 1st,
Yeah.
that we would put it out no later than April 1st, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And in that intervening time, I got stuck in Ira Ann for 2.5 weeks.
Yep.
In March, I developed something called a frozen shoulder in March of 2019, and I couldn't raise my arm past about 6 inches from my body. And that took about 10 months and 43 PT sessions, which takes away from my workday.
Yep.
And
I, on my side, I had 2 huge opportunities pop up. The screenplays that she talked about, and those, we will get in someday. We'll be able to tell you what went down, but when those opportunities came up, it was a difficult decision to make. We're like, we absolutely have to pursue these opportunities. These are game changers for us. And like a lot of things in Hollywood, they didn't work out. So,
well, and not only that, but those, it's interesting because if you're a 2-person business and you are, we didn't put out a book last year. So that is a financial impact for us. And we're just 2 people. So it hurts sometimes to have to make those hard decisions. But the reality also was that all told was maybe 3 or 4 weeks. The timing of that really was small compared to the other sort of scope creep that we had last year. Yeah. So that sounds like, oh my goodness, if you took our money, but it wasn't like that. It was, I think maybe the whole first screenplay was before we put The Gangster on sale,
right. Mm-hmm.
But it still sort of pushes stuff out because you would have been otherwise working on Fitzroy or whatever. And then Fitzroy kind of got away from us.
And Fitzroy has definitely gotten away with us. So I believe we can say that, first of all, if we're publishing on August 18th.
August 18th, 2020.
2020. So it's not that long. So don't get your skivvies in a bunch. It's coming out and it's going to be the hottest shit in the burner. I'm not going to lie to you guys. This book, GFL 6, 7, and 8 are going to just blow some kind of private part off of you. But if you are upset at us for taking so long and holding on to your money, we will gladly refund your money if you are so inclined. If you're disappointed that we have not put the book out, we said we would put it out and we've taken too long and you're mad, no problem. We'll give you your money back for the GFL. But that will cause some...
So we will absolutely refund money. You will absolutely lose your space in the numbering line. There's not a way for us to do that fairly otherwise. And we thought a lot about it. Was there a way for us to kind of hold back a handful of numbers or whatever, but it just, at the end of the day, I think we've been pretty egalitarian about that whole numbering system the whole time. Mm-hmm. And the best way for us to do that is absolutely understandable. We kept your $35 for a year and now we're going to keep it another 6 months.
Yes.
You want that money back? We will get that money back to you ASAP, but you will lose your place in line. And you will be able to order The Gangster once we officially say, hey, we've sent it to the printer and it will be coming out.
Sure.
That said, all of these decisions that we just mentioned for 2020, the no cons, the no Siglerfest, have been very, very painful for us to make. They've been very difficult to figure out what the right answer was. Yeah. Should we do Siglerfest and do no cons? And that wasn't enough to make sure that we could do it. So these deadlines I'm pretty comfortable and confident with. We have a contract for Siglerfest in Las Vegas starting on April 1st, 2021. So that is done. And I have already had requests for proposal and everything sent out to our printers and our diva of design, our inline designer for the book and everything to do this leading up to an August 18th publication date. So that will also happen.
Cool.
I'm pretty confident that will also happen. But we absolutely understand the BS of that. As does, I don't know if you just heard that little whining, as does the Dog of Doom. She also understands that this is a devastating choice. And I don't know what else to say. I could spend the next hour saying, dudes, I know, dudes, I'm so sorry. I know.
Right.
But we have literally been talking about this for 2 months. And this is, as best as we can tell, the best solution to get all the products out. And so what this does, all those 3 painful decisions, it gets all these deadlines closed out. It gets Fitzroy, GFL 6, Phalanx, and The Killer published and in your hands in 2020, because
Yes.
now we have the manpower to manage the work of that. We've also hired an ebook marketing firm.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in a separate cast, but we're working with author Brian Rathbone, who has created a pretty intricate and terrific system that we've been working for about a year. He's actually expanded that a little bit. We're working with him to offload some of that. And we're also working with Simpler Media and Evoterra and our good friend Ali Press to do some of the offloading of getting the podcast out into the world, so that as much work as possible that you can do is focused on social media, which is still so important. You are still one of the only authors/celebrities I know who all of your Facebook is actually you. All of that is really you.
Tell me.
And so we're keeping that because that's important. And we're keeping, of course, the writing and everything else. Like Scott just said, you're mad about it? Let us know. Let's talk about it, because we're definitely upset about it too.
But I will tell you guys this. You may be mad, but you need to survive 2020.
You can do it.
Because whatever you do, stay alive. Because when you get these books, you're going to see it was all worth it.
Yeah. And your writing will continue in 2020. Another thing about these choices that we made is that it is very, very likely that you will actually commence writing
On the Crypt.
in
Yep,
2020.
which I can't wait. So excited.
Yeah.
So excited.
So there's not much else to say. We've gone very long, but that is all the news that's fit to print that we hate to print.
Yep. So again, the Twitter is at Scott Sigler. Facebook.com/Scott Sigler. There's also the Sigler Junkies group. If you've listened this long, you're not part of Sigler Junkies on Facebook, I highly suggest you go to Facebook, search for Sigler Junkies. And that's a great place to talk to your fellow diehard fans. And a lot of conversations happening there. And there are people in that group who have some inside knowledge. They find out before everybody else does because they manage 2,000 people in that group. So some people know what's going on there. But if you've been listening this long, get even farther into the fandom and you will enjoy it.
Yep. And you can always find us at scottsigler.com. You can always shop at scottsigler.com/store. And there is a contact us button on that website. You can click and write us any letter you want to write us about the news you just heard, or you can email us at info@emptyset.com.
There you go. That's the other one. Okay. Anything else?
Nope. We will be coming back next week with the first of the time capsule episodes for the 2007 Nocturnal.
Yes.
And other than that, you can still buy Phalanx, or still buy what's on sale, pre-order?
Pre-orders Phalanx.
Yeah.
scottsigler.com/Phalanx.
Yep.
The links are all right there.
And we'll come back with Talkie Talk. It'll either be Scott or it'll be me. And until then, we will talk to you all
Real soon.